Now we have established that Juna Akara has 52 lineages. And we've established that us Puris constitute 16 of those lineages. And we understand that each of these lineages has a name. And the name is connected to some illustrious Baba, part of that lineage that is not the founder of the lineage in any way, shape, or means, but is somebody so well known and illustrious and famous that over the years, when you refer to that lineage, you refer to that Baba's name.
Yep.
So in our case, in my case, the lineage is called Keshav Puri Multani Baba.
Yeah.
For short, it's called Multani Murti, the Multani lineage. And what does Multani mean? Multani refers to a city in what is now Pakistan by the name of Multan.
Yeah.
This is a very important, significant city. It is in close proximity to Mohenjo-Daro, which is the archaeological site of the Indus Valley civilization, which is the oldest identified civilization in the Indian subcontinent.
Yeah.
We discussed that before.
Yeah.
And Multan was one of the great ancient cities. What's curious about Multan is I've looked at a number of ancient maps, and what you see about Multan is that it has spokes going out in each direction.
Yeah.
Obviously, right, the roads that connect to all the sort of four corners of the ancient world.
Yeah.
But when you look at it on a map, the circle of the city and the spokes that lead out in all the directions also happens to resemble the sun. And Multan was the city that had the ancient sun temple, one of the great ancient sun temples,
Yeah.
one of the great sun temples of the ancient world. A temple that was reputedly built of solid gold, whose reflection one could see for hundreds of kilometers, as it were, which attracted pilgrims from all over the world,
Yep.
and which was fabulously wealthy.
Yep.
So, there was a Baba by the name of Keshav Puri who lived on the outskirts of Multan in a place called Suryakund, which actually means the kund is like a natural pond, a natural container of water, a pool,
Yeah. Kund.
a natural pool.
Kund.
Pool.
No. The
Kund.
Yeah.
Surya Kund. And Surya means sun. So this was at the opposite end of Multan from the ancient sun temple. And this is where this Baba, often called a Siddha Baba, right, one who had powers, where he lived. Now, as the story goes, the king of Multan in those days, and we're talking approximately the 13th century.
Yep.
The king of Multan in those days had an only son, and the son died, and the king was completely distraught. So, since this was the Sind, the sort of the ancient land of Dharma in the Indian subcontinent,
Yep.
and there were sadhus and fakirs and healers and hakims, which were the Muslim healers, and Siddha Babas and all sorts of people running around. The king made an offer that anyone who would bring his son back to life would be given half of his kingdom. However, if someone tried and failed, he would be executed on the spot.
Wow. Okay.
So he didn't want any game playing. He didn't want any fooling around. He wanted only serious applicants, as it were.
Yep.
You bring him back to life or you die. Huh?
Yep.
So I think you could imagine that there weren't a whole lot of applicants.
No.
In fact, there was no applicants.
Yep.
Nobody showed up to attempt to bring his son back to life. But there were a few around his court in those days that were aware of the presence of Keshav Puri over there in Suryakund and his reputation as a Baba with great powers, called Siddha Baba,
Yep.
right? An accomplished Baba, who had tantric powers and so forth.
Yep.
So these courtiers of the king of Multan took it upon themselves to go visit him in his ashram at Suryakund,
Yep.
and they asked him whether or not he indeed had the power to bring the dead back to life. And he affirmed to them that he indeed did have that power. So they further asked him, would he be willing to come to the palace of the king and bring the king's son back to life? And he said yes, he would be willing to do that.
Yep.
So at this point they warned him that the king has offered half the kingdom in return for bringing his son back to life, which Keshav Puri said he was not interested in at all, that he didn't need the headache.
Yep.
But they also had to warn him that if he failed, the king would have him executed on the spot. Was that a problem? And Keshav Puri said, no, it's not. He wouldn't fail, and he's not at all bothered by that prospect. So, having agreed to the terms, Keshav Puri accompanied these courtiers back to the darbar, the palace of the king, and they presented him in front of the king. And the king asked him the same questions that he had been asked before. Can you do this? Can you bring my son back to life? Are you willing to do this? Yes, I'm willing to do this. You do realize that if you fail, we will execute you. Is that acceptable? Do you accept these terms?
Yeah.
And he agreed, yes, indeed. He would accept these terms. So they took him into the next room. And I want you to understand that Multan was one of the first Arab conquests outside of their immediate area. This was the first major Arab conquest in the Indian subcontinent, which took place only a short time after the death of the Prophet. I think within about 50 years,
Yep.
if I'm not mistaken. Within 50 years of the death of the Prophet, Multan had already been conquered by the Arab army coming from Damascus. So Multan was actually under some kind of Islamic, if I may use that term, rule from, I believe, about the 8th century on. So here we are in the 13th century, and this was a what we could describe as a Muslim kingdom that was ruled by a Muslim king, and in the darbar, in the court of the Muslim king, were his advisors and ministers who were very much connected with Islamic law and the Islamic dispensation of justice. So, Keshav Puri Multani Baba is escorted into the room in which lies the deceased son of the king on a cloth. Keshav Puri examines the corpse, walks around the corpse a couple times, and becomes very serious and somber, and looks down at the corpse, and in a very sort of officious voice, says to the corpse, "In the name of Allah, rise from the dead."
Okay.
And nothing happened. So a second time, he looks at the corpse of the young boy, and in his big voice says, "In the name of Allah, I command you to rise from the dead." Nothing happens. Everybody's looking around at each other. There's some nervous glances here and there. Keshav Puri seems to be unaffected by the result so far, and he kicks the boy, says, "You in my name, Keshav Puri Multani Baba, rise from the dead." And the kid stands straight up. Well, the king is overjoyed. His pride and joy, his son, his only son, the one who will continue his royal lineage, is now alive again. He's come back to his father, and the king cries tears of joy. He just doesn't know what to say or how to thank Keshav Puri for doing this. But that happiness and joy was not shared by the other members of his darbar. In fact, they were quite taken aback by the fact that Keshav Puri did not raise the child from the dead using the name of Allah, but by using his own name. And in fact, they vehemently protested to the king immediately by accusing Keshav Puri of blasphemy. The king faced a unanimous chorus from his darbar, from his council of advisors. They all said, this is wrong. This is against Dharma, this is against truth and justice and religion, and this must be addressed, and this man must be punished. They requested to the king that they immediately convene a court of justice, to examine the man's behavior. Mm-hmm. And they assembled a court, and they presented the case to the court against Keshav Puri that this is a crime against humanity, mm-hmm. because he has insulted God himself, that he has usurped God's authority into his own petty ego, practiced black magic, as it were, yep. to raise the child from the dead, and must be judged accordingly. And so the judges all conferred with each other, having heard the evidence, and they unanimously passed the decision that not only was he guilty of the highest form of blasphemy, and not only should he be immediately executed, mm-hmm. but he should be executed by means of torture. And in those days, one of the forms of torture that was considered to be appropriate for a crime of such a high order was that the man's skin should be removed. The way they did this, the way they would do this, is they would slice, they'd make an incision with a sharp knife, yep. over the whole body, yep. and then they would take a vat of boiling oil, and they would drop the man in the vat of boiling oil, in which case what was inside the skin would jump out of the vat of boiling oil. So this was the sentence that they passed on Keshav Puri Multani Baba. He took this with a sense of equanimity, and he said, he asked them, so the sentence is that my skin shall be removed? Is that the sentence? And they agreed that is the sentence. At which point, with his hand touching his head, he removed his skin and laid it at the feet of the judge, yep. of the judges. And he said, the sentence has been executed. Mm-hmm. Do you require anything more of me? Can I go? Yep. The judges, of course, were in shock. Obviously, they had never witnessed such a spectacle before. Yep. They conferred with each other, and the question was, has this sentence been carried out? Mm-hmm. And since one could easily see Keshav Puri standing next to his skin, which was lying on the floor in front of the judges, they had to agree that, yes, indeed, the sentence has been carried out. He cannot be sentenced twice for the same crime. He can't be executed twice for the same crime. And they agreed to his request, and he was allowed to leave. So he walked out of the gates of the palace onto the street. Yep. And he thought to himself, what a day this has been, right? The courtiers of the king come to my ashram, they take me to the grand palace of the king. I raise the dead, You know,
Yeah.
they send me to a religious trial. They sentence me to death. They execute me, and here I am, without my skin. And this whole experience leaves me with a huge appetite. I'm hungry.
Yeah.
I'd like to get something to eat. I haven't even had my breakfast yet today.
Yeah.
So he takes a walk down the street where he hopes to beg from the local people something to eat, some roti, some bread, something. He's got, and he's hungry. But he was such a horrendous sight. Imagine, here is this sadhu without even skin anymore. People were frightened, and they closed their doors and they closed the shutters on their windows, and nobody was even willing to look at him, let alone offer him something to eat.
Yep.
And he walked through the entire town. Nobody was willing to give anything until he finally arrives at the riverbank. From the riverbank, the goddess of the Indus, the river goddess of the Indus, rises out of the river and offers him a fish. Not just any fish, but the pala fish, which has a very unique personality. First of all, this is the throne for the ancient god of waters, the equivalent of Uranus or Varun.
Yeah.
Whose name is Julelal. This is his throne, the pala fish. And the pala fish is known for always swimming against the current. So she offers him, as his lunch or dinner,
Yeah.
the pala fish, which he thanks her for. But in those days, in that culture, sushi and sashimi was not in vogue, and he had no thought to eat his meal raw. So he started going around the town again to beg for some fire so that he could barbecue his fish. Again, the shutters on the windows, the doors were firmly closed, and nobody would offer him any fire. And slowly, slowly, he made it through Multan back to Suryakund. At Suryakund, nobody would give him any facilities to cook his meal. And as he held his fish up, the sun itself came down and roasted his fish for him. And he had his meal, and after having his meal, he retired for the evening. Okay. This is only a small part of who this man was. For not only was he the guru of the so-called Hindus, being a Naga Baba, and therefore a Brahmin. I explained to you earlier that the sannyasis and the Naga sannyasis is basically a Brahmin club. and for one to become at least a major member of a Naga Akara, of a Naga lineage, especially to have one's name associated with a lineage of Naga sannyasis, it's an absolute requirement that the man be a Brahmin. So not only did he have Brahmin chelas, he had Muslim chelas, so-called Muslim chelas as well. And in fact, among his chelas, his disciples, was the greatest of the Persian poets, Jalaluddin Rumi. You've heard of Rumi?
Yes.
Okay, so this was among his disciples. And the great poet, Maulana Rumi, he knew Keshav Puri Multani Baba as Pir Shams. Praise of Pir Shams permeates medieval Persia, even modern Persia, permeates modern Pakistan, and
P.A.?
huh?
P.A. Shams?
Pir, P-I-R.
Oh, Pier, okay, yeah.
Pir is a Persian word. It means father. But Pir is a very significant word because it's going to identify for us a tradition that spills beyond our contemporary understandings of what is Islam, what is Hinduism, and what are national borders.
Yep.
So, Pir Shams has now a following of disciples who are coming from Persia, who are coming from the Indian subcontinent, who are identified in our contemporary times as Muslims, as Hindus, and they are all devoted to this Pir Shams, to this Keshav Puri, to this Multani Baba. He has all sorts of disciples. And finally, when it's time for him to leave his body, he gathers together his diverse disciples and he gives them instructions for his death. And what he tells them is this, that he wants both a Hindu samadhi, a traditional Naga Baba samadhi, which I described to you before, which consists of a deep grave where the body is placed in a meditation posture, a yoga posture, and the grave is covered, filled to the level with salt, on top of which is placed a shivling. Now, next to that grave, his instructions were that a traditional Islamic qabr would be established, which is a casket in which the corpse is laid out prone. However, in this casket, in this cover, there would be no corpse. It would be empty. And in between the samadhi and the cover, there should be a brick wall. And then he warned everyone, if ever the samadhi, or the cupboard, or even the brick wall is ever desecrated, is ever destroyed, he says, I'm going to come back to Multan. I'm going to come back to Multan. I'm going to grab the sun in my right hand. I'm going to bring it down to Multan and burn it to ashes. This was how stern was his warning. Now, all these years later, should we go to Multan, what do we find there? We find one of the grand dargahs, which is a tomb of in this case, a Sufi saint. I use the word Sufi for lack of another word, right? So here is the tomb, which is named after Pir Shams Subswari. Pir Shams Subswari. What does this mean? Pir Shams.
Wait, this is current now?
Current.
Yeah, okay.
You go to Multan today, you'll see this magnificent, I'll show you some photographs if you like, this magnificent dargah, which has thousands and thousands of pilgrims coming to on a regular basis.
Pir Shams
Subswari. And so the meaning of the name on the tomb, Pir Shams, we know, you know, this is the dual personality of Keshav Puri.
Yep.
Subswari describes his place of origin, where he was born, which was the present-day Iranian city of Subswar. Subswar, which is on the edge of what is called Khorasan, the ancient Khorasan and the modern province of Khorasan. And so you can see how we have taken down in in our understanding of who this man was, who is the Maridar, he's the name on our lineage in Juna Akara. We can see how the understanding of this man takes down both the concept of the modern nation state and the contemporary concept of religion and the boundaries of specific beliefs and ideologies. The Muslims worshipped him as a Muslim. The Naga Babas and the so-called Hindus worshipped him as a Hindu, as a Naga Baba, which he was. And in fact, being a Naga Baba, a Naga sannyasi, necessitated that he was a Brahmin. And yet, where was he born? Was he born in India? There was no India then.
Yeah.
There was no Iran then. There was a landmass that was ruled by different powers depending on which century you're examining.
Yeah.
There were influences, there was invasions, there was colonialization, there was rebellion, there was a constant shift in the power structure and the political structure over all this incredible expanse of land that went from the Bay of Bengal beyond the Caspian Sea. And so this idea of religion and this idea, or at least our modern or contemporary understanding of religion, or our contemporary understanding of the nation state, both of these concepts collapse in our understanding of this individual. And he is a Naga Baba. So, you see, to be so reductionist is to have an idea of what is so-called Hinduism, rather than an appreciation of the Sanatan Dharma. To have this modern concept of the Sanatan Dharma put into the neat post-Enlightenment categories of what is a religion, a central doctrine, a central text, and a central deity. Yep. This is the post-Enlightenment concept. This is how we define a religion. And we're looking at something that is different from that. And to locate these things within the concept of a nation state, which wasn't the case at that point, has only been the case in the last couple hundred years, really.
Yep.
We can see how there is something else going on here. And we can see that that if we're going to take a contemporary post-Enlightenment view of Hinduism,
yep,
and then superimpose upon that a very much Western contemporary view of what is a monk, or at best a shaman, and we combine that together and we call that a sadhu or a Naga Baba, we can see how far away from reality we are, and how that becomes just a total construction of the contemporary world. I wanted to say West, but it really includes contemporary India as well. This is a complete construction that doesn't address who this being really is and what his history is, because we tend to look at him almost ahistorical in the sense of a constructed post-Enlightenment religion mixed with a constructed post-Enlightenment concept of the monk or the shaman. And yet what remains is something that is completely intriguing, mystical, subject to oral histories, and containing great secrets. Secrets of identity, secrets of events and histories, and eventually practices. And to me, this is the Naga Baba. This is what is exciting to me, not this construction of an Advaitin who is subject to these monastic borrowings from the West.
Yeah.
That's not interesting to me, to be honest with you. What's interesting is this enigmatic, ironical figure whose mystery holds some of the great secrets of our past.
Which inherently defies categorization.
Well, it certainly defies the post-Enlightenment categories. You know, because I think that should we go back in European thinking, go back to, let's say, the 16th, 17th centuries and so forth,
Yep.
and we look at a vocabulary of Hermeticism and alchemy and so forth, if we look at the figures from this period of time, we look at figures like Paracelsus, we look at some of the other sort of alchemists of this period in Europe, I think we're a lot closer to understanding who these figures are further east. You know, once we reach Asia Minor and Persia and the Indian subcontinent.
Yeah.
And we have a culture, actually, that is a huge culture that I will label as a Pier, not P-I-R,
Yeah.
using the Persian word,
Yeah.
describing a network of sadhus, of ascetics, as it were,
Yeah.
whose focus is not on asceticism, but whose focus is on knowledge and the means of transporting knowledge through time. How do we do this? How do we transport knowledge through time? How do we keep that knowledge from being corrupted? How do we transport the great secrets through time without those secrets being lost? And in order to do that, you see, not only do you need the masters or the thinkers or the siddhas or, you know, the great yogis and fakirs, you also need foot soldiers.
Yeah.
And so when you put all the different elements ranging from the foot soldiers to the generals or the foot soldiers to the masters,
Yeah.
and everything in between, you have these large networks of human beings that move knowledge and secrets through time somewhat uncorrupted. The Enlightenment period and the colonization of the known world, and further, what I would describe as the Anglo-American political narrative, eliminates this entire swath of knowledge and humanity from the human map. We learn to look at this area and this history and these people with the eyes of the contemporary nation state and the contemporary demarcation of religion.